Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to talk about some very important unconscious dynamics to understand if you want to make sense of behavior in organizations and in teams and between people. As you see, the metaphoric use of the iceberg here is to suggest that only a small portion of our behavior is actually conscious. A very large part of the way in which we communicate, function, behave as human beings is below the surface of our consciousness. So, what we try to do as we mature through life and as we grow in our roles is to become more aware of the dynamics that affect our behavior and our thinking. So, specific unconscious dynamics or things that we are going to speak about is projection, projective identification, as well as the idea of the system in the mind. So, if we start with the system in the mind, what this refers to is the constellation of beliefs and fantasies regarding a system and our place in it. Or, in other words, the picture that we have in our minds about what the system is like, or the organization or the team, and how we relate to or belong to or fit into that system. But this picture is not simply a picture like an image. It's a constellation of things that we believe, fantasies we have, feelings we have regarding the system and the way we fit into it. It's also a combination of our backgrounds. So the different members making up your organization, we all come from different backgrounds. We arrive in the organization or in the team, and here we also over time start to build and add to meaning regarding what it means to be here. And this system in the mind, this constellation that we are building, these interconnected feelings, thoughts, fantasies, both have to do with how we interact with each other here, and as well as the mental maps, the stereotypes, the experiences, everything that we bring into the organization or into the team from our respective backgrounds. It is usually unconscious and shared by the members of the organization, and the system in the mind affects how we feel, respond to, and experience the organization. So we act towards the team or towards the organization based on the system in the mind, based on the way in which we perceive this team to be. And then, of course, the closer we can get the system in the mind to reality, the better for the team and its members and its manager. So, for example, the system in the mind may be that this team, this organization, is like a cult in which we all have to agree. We are not allowed to contradict the founders or the leaders. If we want to resign, it's really difficult to resign. It almost feels impossible. It feels as if we are trapped in here, and what we have to do is, at all costs, keep the leader or the founder up there on a pedestal and just make sure that they stay there and that we give all honor and allegiance and loyalty to the ones in charge. So if that is the system in the mind, if that is what people at a deep level believe this organization to be, and believe themselves to be positioned in this way in relation to the organization, then you can see how that will have an influence in whether people are willing to differ, bring critique to the table, whether they feel free to be creative, do their own thing. All these things are affected by the system in the mind. And the system will not transform unless the system in the mind transforms. So unless the organizational leaders can see and acknowledge that this organization acts as if it is a cult, they won't be able to make profound changes within the organization. Another example is people saying the organization is like a family. Um, the and it's not often even a family business. It can be any type of team. We are like family. If the system in the mind of family is the governing principle, it means the behavior in that team will also be as if this team is a family. The team, of course, is not a family. In many families, certain topics are taboo, which may then also be the case in this team where that is the system in the mind. Also, in many families, mostly in families, you can't fire a family member or get rid of them. And then in the team, it might also feel that the loyalty built in the team makes it impossible to let someone go if the task requires a different kind of skill set or whatever the case may be. So in both these cases, the system in the mind is this organizing principle and constellation of ideas, feelings, thoughts that have a very strong influence on all decisions being made in the organization, and those decisions are not always in line with what one would rationally expect from the organization or the team given its primary task. It's also then by looking at task, if you look at the primary task versus the as if or the assumed task, this as if or assumed task would then be guiding us towards what the system in the mind may be. If this is what people act, if people act like this, as if this is the primary task, maybe then the underlying belief about the organization is X. And unless we change that, we won't be able to see transformation towards greater effective work towards the task. Okay, let's speak about projection. Projection is a very common dynamic. What happens when I project something on someone else? We say I project a part of myself on someone else, usually a part of myself that I find difficult to tolerate. In my fantasy world, I create the fantasy that this part of myself that I'm struggling to tolerate, that this actually belongs to someone else. And then my fantasy is if that person can carry that and go away from me, then I will be rid of this, let's say, bad part. It's as if we split ourselves into good and bad, and the bad parts we want to project onto others. A good example is, for instance, how we deal with competence and incompetence. If we work in a complex, fast-changing world, it means we are often and mostly very close to the boundary of our own competence and our own incompetence, because we work with things that are uncertain and unknown. We walk this line very closely. But it's possible that in a specific organizational context, that incompetence is not tolerated, and we have to pretend that we are only fully competent and in control. The problem then is the incompetence and all the feelings associated with that has to go somewhere, because I'm not allowed to acknowledge that I am experiencing also some incompetence in certain situations. So what happens is I split off. It's as if in my imagination I imagine that I am fully competent because I can't tolerate owning my own incompetence. And then this incompetence of mine, I scan the environment to see someone onto whom I can project incompetence. And then I can act as if the incompetence is there and the competence is here. And if there are some others of us in the team that can find the same person or the same scapegoat to carry the incompetence on behalf of the team, then we can all feel a little safe for a while, because we are all living then in the illusion that we are the competent ones and the incompetent sits there. We often also see how departments in organization project things onto each other. So whenever you hear us, them speak, us, we are like this, they are like that, you can know that there's projection happening. So we are good, they are bad. What it actually says is this: the parts of ourselves that we find difficult to acknowledge and own, we act as if those parts actually belong to a different department. So either another department, as in silo mentality, or sometimes we act as if the client is the bad one or the government is the bad one. Whenever there's any us-them speak, there's some form of projection busy happening. Also, when people start to speak in these extreme binaries, it's good or bad, splitting things into extremes, and then the fantasy that the good part of the extreme belongs to me or to us, and the bad part of the extreme belongs there. When this happens, it means your team is not dealing with the full reality and the full complexity of its task. So it's usually not a good way of a good pattern to get into the splitting and projection, because we speak in absolutes, in binaries, and we lose the middle ground. And in a way, then the team also becomes more and more unsafe, because ambiguity can't be dealt with. Any form of vagueness can't be dealt with. The gray areas start to disappear. It's either this or that in the extremes. And then you have to be sure that you are on the good side of the extreme. Otherwise, the badness, it gets projected onto you. Okay, let's speak about projective identification. This is a very strong dynamic. It happens when someone projects, let's say they project their bad part or an unwanted part onto someone else, then they act in a way to put pressure onto that person to identify with the projection, or in other words, to act as if that projection is actually true. Let me give an example. So let's say I struggle to hold and integrate and own the part of myself that is weak, vulnerable, and scared. I rather like to identify with the part of me that feels strong and in control and brave. But the scared part, the vulnerable part, I don't want to acknowledge. Maybe because of where I come from, maybe because of how I've been treated when I was younger and smaller and more vulnerable. I struggle to integrate this into my person. So what I do is I imagine that these unwanted feelings don't belong to me. I imagine that they belong to someone else. I scan the environment to find someone who can probably fit the mold. So maybe if it's on the playground, I find someone who looks a little bit smaller than myself. And my fantasy is that that person is the weak one and not myself. And I act towards that person in a way that then makes them feel afraid, makes them act weak and identify with the projection. And then I can feel justified in having projected that onto that person in the first place. Another example, we spoke about the basic assumption of dependency. There, the team can project their competence onto the team leader and act as if the team leader is the only one who knows everything, who can do everything, and we as a team, we are kind of absolved of all responsibility, and we act in a way towards the leader that make them feel compelled to then take control, do more things, show their competence. So first of all, we split off our competence, project it onto the team leader. The team leader feels this, they feel this competent feeling, and they can also see that we act in a way that we are not bringing our competence to the table. We are waiting, we are not adding our critical ideas and our critical thoughts, and all of this kind of compels the leader to take the projection and to come and save us and do things on our behalf. And once that happens, once the dynamic is in motion, it's difficult to just stop that unless the leader can become aware that this projective identification is in place. After a while, the leader may see, but it's impossible. These people can't be so stupid. They can't be so quiet and unwilling to take any responsibility. They can't be this incompetent. There must be something going on here. And if the leader then can start to give the projection back, meaning start to require of people to take up their competence, to hold them accountable, then the projection can be given back and the leader can get out of this projective identification dynamic. Sometimes projective identification is also a way of communication. So if I feel uh, that if I feel it's very difficult for me to speak in words about something of my experience in the team, I may sometimes act in a way that may make the other feel the feelings that I feel, in a way of communicating these feelings. So, for instance, I feel incompetent. I don't know how to speak about this. I'm too scared. Maybe the culture in this organization doesn't allow this, to speak about my feelings of incompetence. What I will do now is I will act towards someone else in such a way that make them feel incompetent, in a way kind of communicating through my behavior my sense of incompetence. So if you are the team leader and a team member or someone outside of your team acts towards you as if you are incompetent and you feel these feelings, you can also hypothesize, well, maybe this is what they are feeling. They're putting their feelings into me as a way of trying to tell me what is going on there, how they are feeling. And if I can have some part of bandwidth available to think, well, maybe this is what is going on there, this can create empathy in me for what the other may be feeling. And that empathy is usually also then the catalyst for a transformation of the dynamic. Okay, thank you. This is the end. We'll speak about the rest of this in class.